Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. We'll just wait a couple of minutes here for everyone to join in. We have 48 people that registered for the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area webinar. We appreciate your interest in this topic, and I'll talk a little bit about the agenda in just a moment. Well, good evening, everyone. We'll just wait a couple of minutes here. Join in. We have 48 people that registered for the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area webinar. We appreciate your interest in this topic, and I'll talk a little bit about everyone. All right, we'll just wait a minute or two here before we get started. All right. Well, let's get started at 6:30. We have an hour for this webinar. Good evening. My name is Grant Fernelius. I am the Community Development Director for the City of Coon Rapids, and I am joined by Scott Harlicker, who is the City Planner for the city. We're pleased that, again, as I said earlier, we're pleased that you could join us tonight for this webinar. We appreciate your willingness to do this via Zoom. These are obviously challenging times, and we chose this format to make it more convenient and obviously safe for everyone. So we appreciate your patience as we work through the technological issues here. As I mentioned, we have this set aside for 60 minutes. We'll have a short presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for question and answer. We're going to do this via the Q&A tab. So on your screen, if you use your cursor, you should be able to type in a question. We will see those questions on our end. This is set up in such a way that the questions will not be viewed by the audience, but we will read them off and then attempt to or try to answer them. If we're unable to do that, we do plan to post the questions and responses to our website following this webinar sometime in the next week or so. So you can check back if you asked a question, we were unable to answer it, to see what the answer is. And you all can also contact us directly, and we'll provide you with contact information at the end of our presentation so that you can reach out to us via email or give us a phone call. We'd be happy to talk to you further about that. This webinar is also being live streamed on the city's YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch it. It will be recorded. So if someone was not able to join us or you want to go back and view a portion of it, you should be able to do that. So with that, I'm going to open up a presentation here, and give me a moment here just to talk a little bit about, hopefully you can see that on your screen. So I wanted to talk just a little bit in terms of what the outline is for tonight, talk a little bit about background. Some of you who are watching this tonight may be familiar with the MRCCA rules. Those have been in place for a number of years. We have a provision in our code related to that. So this process is really, what we're talking about is updating those rules. Some of you may not be familiar with that. So we'll talk a little bit about that background and history, and then talk about some of the key concepts that are a part of this set of special rules that we have. Talk about the timeline, and then, as I mentioned, we'll carve out the time that is left to address questions that you might have about this topic. So let me talk a little bit about the background. The MRCCA was established in the mid-70s. It is a corridor that runs from basically Ramsey, Dayton, all the way down to Hastings. And it's designated to protect natural, cultural, and scenic resources. And it's jointly regulated by both the DNR, the Met Council, and then the 30 individual communities that are a part of this corridor. Coon Rapids established its MRCCA rules in 1979, and those were then codified into our city code. Chapter 11-1001 is where you can find those. We also have a section devoted to our comp plan, or in our comp plan, I should say, devoted to the Mississippi River Corridor critical area. So you can find additional information there in terms of policies, goals that the city has outlined related to the MRCCA. I did get a question to move the slides. So I will attempt to do that. Don't know if that helps. So I apologize for that. Hopefully that's an improvement. In terms of where we are now, or how we got to where we are today in 2021, the current update process actually started back in 2009. The legislature directed the DNR to update these rules. There was kind of a start and a stop back in 2011. The authority to do that rulemaking lapsed, so the legislature had to reauthorize that, and DNR didn't start until 2013. And then between 2013 and 2015, the DNR held a number of public meetings. Some of you who are watching this may have participated in those and may be familiar with that process. But all of that public input was part of the eventual rulemaking process, which the DNR then adopted in 2019. 2018 timeframe. And then as a result of that, the DNR also created a model ordinance. So the DNR has a set of rules. The local cities then need to adopt rules that are in alignment with those rules. So for the most part, we don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we craft our ordinance. There are a few provisions that we have some flexibility if it doesn't relate to our particular community, but for the most part, we don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of how the code is going to be structured. So what is the MRCCA in terms of how does it apply in our community? In zoning circles, we refer to it as an overlay. So the map that you see is a map of Coon Rapids, or a portion of Coon Rapids, including the area that is the MRCCA, which is this light blue dashed line. That's the area that we're talking about tonight. So there are zoning rules in place, underlying zoning, LDR1, LDR2, those are our low density residential districts. We also have some areas that are zoned conservancy. So there's a set of rules that apply in those districts, things like building height, the amount of minimum lot requirements, the amount of impervious surface that apply to all properties with that zoning designation. In addition, those properties that are part of this overlay also have an additional set of restrictions, which for the most part relate to setbacks, where you can place certain buildings, particularly accessory structures, grading, erosion control, and how you manage vegetation, which is related to the MRCCA. I'll talk a little bit about if you've looked at any of these materials, you'll see that there are 6 different types of districts which exist within the entire corridor. There are 4 of those that really relate to Coon Rapids, and we'll talk a little bit about these momentarily, but one of them is river neighborhoods. So these are generally the residential neighborhoods with access to the river. There's also a different district called separated from the river, and that's land that's separate from and not visible to the river. And then we have something called river towns and crossings, which tend to be sort of the, well, not in the case of Coon Rapids, but for example, think of historic Hastings, historic downtown Anoka. In our case, it actually applies to the Anoka Ramsey Community College campus that falls within that RTC designation. And then we also have something called rural and open space, which are large tracts of undeveloped land, primarily in our case, in and around Coon Rapids Regional Dam Park. This is a map. I'm seeing some additional chat comments here. Okay, all right, very good. Sorry about that. I just had to check the chat comments. This next slide is the actual map, which shows those district designations that I mentioned. I think my cursor shows up here. So you can see the areas that, for example, are designated as river neighborhood, the areas that are designated as rural and open space, which is in the green, the river towns and crossings, which is the ARCC campus, and then this sort of orange color, which is the separated from river designation. So those are the 4 different designations, MRCCA designations that we have here in Coon Rapids. So let me advance, if I can, to some of the key provisions that you're probably curious about. So we'll start with setbacks. That's something that I think a lot of people are curious about. Nothing really changed as it relates to structure setbacks. So what's in place today will be in place when the code is updated. Also, as it relates to building height, there were no changes either. So the same standards are in place. I have a graphic here, which shows if you remember, the 4 different district designations. So as you can see, and I've blocked out the 2 districts that don't apply in Coon Rapids. I've also highlighted the districts that tend to be our residential districts. So as you can see, for example, the maximum structure height in the river neighborhoods is 35 feet. The minimum setback to the river is 100 feet, and the bluff structure setback is 40 feet. That's the current standard. That will be the standard that's in place as we go forward. In the separated from river district, the underlying zoning would prevail. Really, the only thing that applies in that case is the 40-foot setback. And you can see what the other height restrictions and setbacks are for the other 2 districts that we have. But again, those are primarily park and institutional type uses. A few concepts that are, I think, important to understand when looking at this particular set of rules, one of which is the term that we'll talk about, which is the bluff. Under our current code, a bluff is considered really any area between the ordinary high water line and I guess setback from the river at a 12% slope. Under the new code, it's a little more specific, and actually it is a little higher standard. So the net result is there's actually slightly fewer properties that would be subject to this bluff requirement under the new code than are currently. There's really two pieces to this. So a bluff can be, at the top illustration refers to a slope rising 25 feet in height at an 18% grade over a 25-foot horizontal distance. So that's what is considered the bluff. That's this area between these two blue, blue lines, if you will. It can also be a slope rising 10 feet in height at a 75% grade over a 10-foot horizontal distance. So this is a much steeper slope, but that also is considered a bluff for purposes of the MRCCA. The other thing that's important, and this is a new provision, is something called a bluff impact zone, or a BIZ, and that's really the area that's within 20 feet of the bluff. And so you can see the bluff impact zone actually runs from the ordinary high water, actually 20 feet outside of the ordinary high water mark or high water line, which is this area here, and then 20 feet from the top of the bluff. So this bluff impact zone is a larger geographic area, if you will, and it's relevant for placement of accessory structures, water access, and what's covered under vegetation and erosion control. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. This next slide is a map that then depicts the areas that are covered under the bluff impact zone. These may not be real easy to see, but it's this sort of light blue line, or excuse me, brown line. Those are the areas that have been determined to be essentially bluffs within Coon Rapids. And then you can see a number of them along the perimeter of Coon Rapids Regional Dam Park. The other concept that is something we wanted to mention tonight is a shore impact zone. So a shore impact zone is an area primarily along the water line from the ordinary high water line back 50% of the principal structure setback. So that again is also relevant in terms of what you can place with regard to accessory structures, water access, those kinds of things. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you can and can't do in the shore impact zone and also in the bluff impact zone as well. But that's another concept that is mentioned in these new set of rules and will be part of our new code. Whereas the previous map for bluff impact zone kind of identified areas where that would apply. As you can see here, this red line identifies that there are shore impacts all along the entire shoreline of the Mississippi River in Coon Rapids. So that impacts all properties. The previous slide, impacted fewer properties. And again, we'll talk about what that means. Water access is something that obviously is a key provision for those that live along the river. The current code, if you were to look at it, is really silent on access to the river. The new code allows for up to an 8-foot access path in the shore impact zone. So again, that's actually kind of in this area. This graphic is not the best at depicting that, but you could have an 8-foot access path in the shore impact zone, and then a narrower 4-foot access path in the bluff impact zone. So one of the things that this graphic points out is that the bluff impact zone actually follows kind of the topography of an individual lot. So that will vary. The shore impact zone is more of a static line. So it's really relative to a setback of the principal structure. The new code also addresses stairways, lifts, and landings. For landings, you can have a maximum 32 square foot landing within that bluff impact zone. And also for every 300 feet of footage along the river, you can have one water-oriented structure, which is a maximum of 120 square feet with a 10-foot setback. Decks and patios is another issue that is addressed in the new code. So it does allow for encroachment into that front setback. It's limited to 15% of the required setback. And it cannot extend into, and this again is a deck or patio off of a principal structure, cannot extend into the bluff impact zone or the shore impact zone. Vegetation management is another provision that's addressed in the new code. So under our current code, intensive vegetation removal is not allowed. Under the new code, it's also addressed. Intensive removal is not allowed within the bluff impact zone and the shore impact zone. There are some permitting requirements. Maintenance kinds of activities are not subject to a permit. Removal of a particular tree, if it's diseased, I don't believe is subject to a permit requirement. We're still working through that. We don't have those permit requirements actually spelled out at this point, but that will be something that we'll have to put in place as part of this new ordinance. The other piece is land alteration permits. So if you're doing any kind of significant grading, either within the bluff impact zone or 50 feet of the ordinary high water line, that will trigger a permit, and that's anything from 10 cubic yards of material to 1,000 square feet of area. So that would probably cover things like riprap, retaining walls, erosion control. Those sorts of things would also trigger a permit. Nonconformities. So a question that someone may have is, well, what if I have a structure and it doesn't meet what the new code will require? We're treating nonconformities like they are anywhere else in the community. There are provisions in state law. You can see the reference there, Chapter 462.357, Subdivision 1E, that specifically addresses nonconformities. So a legal nonconformity, something that was established legally prior to the creation of our new code, can remain. It can still be there. You can maintain it. You can replace it if it becomes damaged. There are some timeframes within which you need to do that, but you can still maintain that nonconformity and have that. However, you can't expand a nonconformity. So as you can see here in this particular graphic, with regard to a principal structure, you can't expand a nonconformity closer to either the bluff impact zone or the shore impact zone, but you can expand laterally. So that's this area off to the side, but you can't expand a nonconformity closer to the river. In terms of the schedule, where we're at, obviously right now, we started working on the draft ordinance this past summer. Right now, we're in the process of obviously reaching out to the public. This is kind of the first step in that process. Conducting the webinar tonight is one of those things that we're going to do to obviously alert the public about these changes that are coming. The formal process for starting the update will begin late this fall, early this winter. We'll provide more information on that. We'll send out another postcard. We'll put up the draft ordinance so that the public can view it. is aware of what those changes are. And then there'll be a formal process that we will go through with the Planning Commission. Planning Commission will conduct a public hearing. There'll be an opportunity for the public to provide testimony. And we'll likely do that January, February timeframe. And then eventually we'll have the council, we'll have to present the draft ordinance to the DNR. I guess I'm kind of covering the same topic here. So around the same time that we have the council act on it, we'll present it to the DNR. And then the council will enact it by June of this year. We need to have these new rules in place. We were supposed to have this done June of this year, but due to everything that's gone on in the last year and a half, we asked for additional time, and the DNR was willing to accommodate that. So that's a little bit about the timeline. In terms of contact information, Scott Harlicker is our planner. I've provided his phone number and email address, as well as my contact information. So if you want to reach out to us with questions by email or call us directly, we're certainly happy to do that. We do have additional information on our website. If you go to our website, we have under the planning tab, we have information about the MRCCA, so you can go there for additional resources if you're interested in doing that. So that concludes the part of my presentation. What we'll do with the time that we have left, a little over 30 minutes, is to address questions. So again, just as a reminder, the way that this will work is that you'll enter your questions up in the Q&A, which is at the top, should be at the top of your screen. Scott and myself will be able to view those questions. We'll then read them out and attempt to answer them. Again, if we can't, we'll provide a follow-up on our website with a complete list of questions that were raised tonight with those answers, including those that we weren't able to address this evening. So with that, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to click on the first question that we have here, which is, why in Coon Rapids are we tied to the Coon Creek watershed when wanting to do improvements to shoreline properties? Other residents along the river are able to work with their respective city, in this case, Champlin, Anoka, Brooklyn Park. Well, I'll attempt to answer that, and then Scott, if you wanna chime in, you can certainly do that. We don't really have a whole lot of choice in the matter. The Coon Creek Watershed District exists under state law, and they are the regulatory body as it relates to watershed issues. There are a number of watershed districts in Anoka County. The one that impacts Coon Rapids primarily is the Coon Creek Watershed District and affects most of the properties that we're talking about here. Other communities also work with their respective watershed districts. I can tell you, for example, an adjacent community, the city of Fridley, I believe there are 3 different watershed districts. So and that can be an even more complicating situation when as a city you have to deal with separate regulatory bodies. But in our case, we work with the Coon Creek Watershed District. So we don't have a whole lot of choice in terms of that part of it. That's essentially been established under state law. That's the appropriate body for Coon Creek, which of course connects to the Mississippi River. All right, I've got a second question here, which is it safe to assume that incidental homeowner performed manual labor work along the river will be exempt? Example would be dumping a half a yard of trap rock to shore up deficiencies in my retaining wall. that I guess is probably something we would want to talk with you on an individualized basis to sort of understand how much material and how much work is being done. I had a slide up that showed what those respective volumes are with regard to triggering a permit. So I think it would probably be safe to just contact staff, talk a little bit about your project. If it's something fairly small and incidental, then you're probably correct, but I think we would want to confirm that. All right. Our next question is, any aid available to help with the cost to mitigate erosion or to help with erosion control? Not at this time. We don't have any resources that are devoted specifically to that. The city does have a number of home improvement programs which are available, which could include potentially some kind of improvement activity. Whether or not, I guess it would ultimately depend on what kind of work you're doing, but we don't have specific funds set aside for mitigation efforts. All right. Please define shore accessories. So I don't know specifically what that's in reference to. Scott, do you have any thoughts on that?
Chime in on that. We don't have a specific definition for shore accessories. However, we do have a definition for something similar to that, water-oriented accessory structures. Examples of that would include gazebos, screen houses, fish houses, pump houses, detached decks, and patios. Don't have a specific definition for shore accessories. However, we do have a definition of something similar to that, water-oriented accessory structures.
Okay.
Examples of that would.
All right. I'm getting a little bit of a delay here, so I apologize for the pause. Thank you for that, Scott. The next question is, what about neighbors putting up privacy fences? What is the setback? Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the proposed ordinance allows fences and up to 6 feet high and down towards the river as far as the bluff. Fences cannot be located within the bluff. It is. It can't be any higher than 6 feet. Not located within a bluff and not located within a regulatory floodplain. There isn't a special permit that's required. However, we do have, it's called a site work application, and that's relevant through all parts of the city. And fences do fall under that, and they will require a permit like any other fence. So those are the regulations that are in the current ordinance. We are also looking at possibly adding language that would limit fences. Right now, they're not located within a bluff, but including bluff impact zones and shore impact zones in areas where they cannot be located.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. We have another question about 32 square foot landing sounds very small. Did I read that correctly? And that's my understanding. So that would be what, 8 by 12 would be the limitation on a landing specifically. So yes, that's what the code or the new code would limit. All right. I see in the chat, there's also a separate question here. I'm going to close out of my One moment here. I'm going to close out of the stop share so that you can actually see Scott and I. And so up in the chat, oh, down here, excuse me. There was a question about, can you speak to any environmental goals or advantages of working with Coon Creek and with better defined parameters? Well, I guess I'll answer it this way. Coon Creek is the regulatory body, the watershed district. So they deal with, a lot of issues in and around Coon Creek. They deal with issues related to, projects where there's a lot of earthwork, a lot of grading. And so there's different regulatory triggers for when you need to talk to the county, or it's not the county, excuse me, the watershed district. And so we often recommend that people reach out to us, either to planning staff or city engineering staff, and we can kind of get a better understanding of what the project is. And then if we need to provide a referral to the watershed district, we can certainly do that. We always recommend people reach out to the watershed district, especially if they're talking about a fairly significant or a large project. It's always a good idea to talk with the watershed district early on, just to make sure that they're identifying any relevant issues that might impact your project. So here's another question in the chat. Do the regulations reference and/or regulate the type of vegetation that can be planted along the shoreline? Scott, do you want to?
Well, I can try to attempt to answer that. I don't believe there's limits as to what type of vegetation you can plant. We do try to encourage more native plantings, and of course stay away from ash trees and things like that. Looking it up here to see if there's anything else in the code. Yeah, what we try to look for is vegetation that stabilizes soil, controls runoff, infiltration, and try to make it consistent with nearby vegetation. And as like I said earlier, try to use native species when you go out and pick what type of shrubs and trees you're going to use. All right. Also looks like we've got another comment here in the Q&A. Is it okay to trim branches off trees without a permit? Yes, it is. Trim off lower branches and dead branches without a permit.
Thank you. And then I also see another question here about, will we be able to replay this webinar in the future? And the answer to that is yes. We are recording it. So we will have that posted or this posted in the near future on our website, where you can certainly watch it. Let's see, I think we have addressed all the questions that we've received so far. Okay. comment about just speaking a little clearer. So I apologize. We'll attempt to do that. All right. Any other questions that you can think of? If not, oh, here we had one come in. When will you have further work done? Not exactly certain I know what that's a reference to. I guess I can maybe touch a little bit on maybe the process in terms of the schedule. So the draft ordinance we anticipate will be ready for public review sometime in the next month and a half. We'll try and get it out there so that people have an opportunity to look at it. Certainly when it's going to be presented to the Planning Commission, there'll be an opportunity to review it, but we would like to have it out in advance of that so that we can get additional public comment. So I would guess sometime in November, December timeframe, we should have that draft ordinance available for the public to take a look at. Yep, there you go. When we have further work done on the ordinance. So I just addressed that question. Okay, a couple of questions in the chat here. Again, why can Anoka? I guess I don't understand that comment. So perhaps you could clarify that. Let's see, we have any additional questions coming in? All right. Okay. Well, I don't see any additional questions at this point. So we will wrap things up here. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. I know this format can be a little bit challenging, but hopefully it's also convenient for people to participate in an event like this. As I said earlier, we will have it recorded, or we are recording it. We'll have it posted to our website so that you can go back and watch it, or refer to someone else who maybe didn't have an opportunity to view it. And again, you can go to our website for additional information on the overlay and the next steps in the process. So let's see here. I guess there's an additional question here about if you lose a big tree to erosion in the river, what is the homeowner's responsibility? Scott, do you want to?
We'll have to get back to him on that one.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the procedure would be with that and would be responsible.
Okay.
For that.
We'll follow up on that and post that on our FAQ. So we more to follow on that. All right. Well, I think we will leave it there. Again, we appreciate your time this evening, and look for more information in the near future on this topic as we get closer to the public hearing. We'll send out an additional postcard, much like we did for this particular webinar this evening. So you can know that will be coming out. You can also check our website, sign up for email updates. We also post information there as well. So I will leave it there. Thank you again for your time this evening. Thank you to Scott for your help as well. And hope you have a good evening. Thank you.